It was unfortunate that it was frightened bar patron who discovered the bomb. Like most of the character archetypes who hung out in Joe's bar on slack days, frightened had a very limited vocabulary. Because their whole reason for existing was to thrive in the background, most UCAs were limited to 2 or 3 sentences. Bartender, for instance, could choose between asking, "What'll it be?" or "Rough day," or saying, "I'll put it on your tab," which made it hard to have deep philosophical conversations. So when he looked under the table next to his and saw a screen with digital numbers counting down towards 0, frightened bar patron's options for alerting the other UCAs was somewhat limited. He had a choice between, "Oh no!" and "Look out!" which on first consideration seems suitably alarming, but he used those same phrases to order a beer or to say good morning, so he was not able to inspire the level of urgency to the characters around him that he might have wished. He persisted, however, and eventually managed to get the attention of Clumsy Waitress. Unfortunately, she didn't have any lines at all, only the sound of breaking glasses. This was enough to draw polite attention to herself, but she wasn't able to communicate the gravity of their situation to the other UCAs either. Life in their little community had its challenging aspects. Clumsy Waitress stood very still for several seconds, then placed herself in front of Hot Girl number 2, the only other UCA who could move freely about the room. She grabbed the surprised character by her shoulders and looked deeply into her eyes, effectively communicating a sense of urgency. Hot Girl number 2 stood staring at her in confusion. Clumsy Waitress managed her very intense eye contact, then repeated, "Okay," Hot Girl number 2 thought to herself. This clearly meant something. There was definitely a pattern here. 3 short, 3 long, and 3 short. Wait a second. Hot Girl number 2's eyes grew wide. "Oh," she said, "he's cute," in Southern understanding, replied the frustrated waitress. Hot Girl number 2 rushed to the table next to frightened bar patron and flipped it over, revealing an elaborate arrangement of wires, a large block of gray putty, and a digital screen now counted down from 45 seconds. She looked over to Jukebox Girl for guidance. Jukebox Girl, who liked to think of herself as J-Girl, though of course nobody knew to call her that, had more emergency experience than any of them. She'd been in a series of low-budget action movies at one point and had seen more bomb scenarios than almost any other UCA, certainly more than anybody else in the room. J-Girl understood, but her movement was restricted to a few feet in any directions from the actual jukebox. She said urgently to Hot Girl number 2, who correctly took this to mean that she'd actually have to defuse the bomb herself. She turned and saw her friend holding out a steak knife to her. Hot Girl number 2 took this, again, correctly to mean that she was supposed to cut something, presumably a wire. She looked back down at the bomb and was unsurprised to see 2 obvious wires connected to the timer, one bright blue and the other red. She took the knife, careful not to cut her friend, and turned back to J-Girl. She raised her eyebrows and shrugged as if to ask what to do. The solution was fairly straightforward, but being restricted to communicating in titles of songs on her actual jukebox, explaining what to do was complicated. She had a list of song titles to work with, but obviously very few hit songs in the 1980s dealt with ordnance disposal. This was like solving a crossword puzzle backwards. Using the best explanation that came to mind, J-Girl shook her head no dramatically. "My way," she said, pointing to her shaking head. There were always a couple of Sinatra songs on any jukebox from the 1980s. Hot Girl number 2 thought very hard. The timer was down to 27 seconds. My way probably implied a direction, and the blue wire was closest to the jukebox, so she knelt quickly to cut it. She had just touched the knife to the wire when J-Girl shouted,
Ballroom Blitz!
pointing again to her shaking head.
Looking for love in all the wrong places,
she said. Hot girl number 2 pointed to the red wire with the tip of the knife and looked to J-Girl for confirmation. The woman at the jukebox confirmed. Hot girl number 2 sawed desperately at the red wire, and after a second or two she cut through it. The timer stopped at 6 seconds, and the light slowly faded out. Hot girl number 2 stood up, panting, and looked around the room. "Who the hell planted a bomb in our bar?" she shouted. Or rather, that's what she would have said in an ideal universe. Of course, in an ideal universe, no one would be trying to blow up the bar. So what actually came out was an angry, "Oh, he's cute," as she glared around the bar. Everyone in the room was a regular. Hot girl number 2 didn't know everything about everyone here, but she was pretty sure that none of them were willing to blow themselves up. There was a soap opera scheduled to take over the bar on Friday. They were going to hang new signs and call it the Night Club. Ha ha ha. A pair of characters named Celia and Lambrusco were supposed to talk earnestly about their feelings and drink some champagne, but today it was just the usual character archetypes. Clearly, J-Girl understood what she was thinking.
people are strange when you're a stranger.
A stranger? By thinking very hard, hot girl number 2 vaguely remembered somebody sitting at the table near the door. Trying to remember them was almost like looking at a 3D poster. It took concentration and it even hurt her head a little, but she gradually brought a memory into focus of a man. Was it a man? In a trench coat, sitting at the table, clearly scoping out the room. Well, regardless, he was gone now. But one thing was obvious to hot girl number 2 with crystal icy clarity. Nobody planted a bomb in her bar. She kicked over a chair and seemingly without effort, she ripped one of the legs off. She twirled it around in a figure 8, nodded grimly to the room, and marched out the door. "I'll put it on your tab," bartender called after her. Nosy Neighbor was an asset to the neighborhood, which was actually a bit ironic because it was the opposite of what her role was supposed to be. Like Jukebox Girl, she was restricted to a very small physical space. She could lean out the window of her second-floor apartment in the building across the corner from the bar. But unlike most of her fellow UCAs, she could say almost anything she liked, as long as it was phrased as a shrill diatribe. Also, like Jukebox Girl, she'd been around a long time. Rumor had it as long as some black and white shorts from the 1940s, and was much smarter than anyone gave her credit for. Nothing happened in the neighborhood without her knowing about it. As Hot Girl 2 strode out onto the street, Nosy Neighbor started laying into her. "You kids ought to be ashamed of yourselves," she shouted to the woman with the chair leg, pointing meaningfully down Maple Street. "Stop running down the street like maniacs. You might knock somebody over with your... She paused briefly, searching through her vocabulary to find a useful phrase. "Your shenanigans. You might be some sort of mad bombers for all I know." Hot girl number 2 looked down the street in the direction the Nosy Neighbor was pointing, and could just make out a figure in a trench coat vanishing around a corner. She smiled up at the older character, making a mental note to bring her some generic Chinese takeout later as thanks, and saluted her by touching the chair leg to her forehead, and then took off running. Anyone who only knew her casually would have been surprised at how athletic hot girl number 2 was. The adjective hot was vague enough that it allowed her to train herself into a state of impressive physical fitness. Clearly, the guy in the trench coat didn't expect her to catch up with him, given his head start, but she got some help from other UCAs on the street. "Oh, he's cute," she shouted, getting the attention of 2 workmen carrying a plate glass window across the street, and fruit cart guy, who managed to trip him up. As hot girl number 2 closed in on him, the figure in the trench coat ducked down a blind alley in the hope of losing her, only to find himself trapped. "Ooh, he's cute," hot girl number 2 said, breathless with exertion, but still very angry. The man in the trench coat and fedora. Really? Hot girl number 2 thought. Even in a world of cliches, this was a little on the nose. Wheeled around and glared at her. Or rather, she assumed he was glaring. His body was hunched in anger, but he had no face to read. just a gray blur that flickered like a bad television signal flashing different faces for fractions of a second. But clearly he was angry. "You nameless freaks think you're so special," he said in a flat, almost robotic voice. "You get to spend day after day in a bar being..." He paused briefly, looking for the right word. "Being hot, while some of us who deserve it more never get a chance." Hot girl number 2 got it. She realized who she was up against. A rough draft. Rough drafts were characters, or sometimes physical locations, that had at one point been intended to play a major role in a script, but for one reason or another had never made it to production. Most of the rough drafts quickly faded away, and most of the ones who didn't were perfectly nice, grateful just to exist. She had dated a rough draft named Quirky Watchmaker for a while, and he'd been delightful. A gray fox of a man who just really knew how to... Well, that wasn't important in the moment. Every once in a while, however, a draft hung around, getting angrier and angrier, obsessed with what they saw as a destiny that had been stolen from them. This guy seemed particularly angry. "Yes, I planted the bomb," he said, "and you will never know where the next one will be." He stood, panting with silent exhaustion and rage, and glared at hot girl number 2 as if daring her to do something about it. It was easy to underestimate hot girl number 2. She was so good-looking and had such a limited vocabulary that it was easy to assume that she was fairly shallow. That was incorrect. The fact of the matter was that she had been around much longer than anybody suspected. She had only taken on the hot girl identity about a year ago at the insistence of her agent with a cigar. "You're going places, kid," he'd told her. She had not, in fact, gone places. But that was life as a UCA. What most characters didn't know was that she had worked under a very different identity in a series of Scandinavian historical dramas. Angry Viking Shield Maiden. Hot girl number 2 smiled grimly to herself as she approached the angry rough draft, spinning the chair leg around the back of her hand. There were no more bombings. This is a pretty nice little cocktail. It is a basic utility cocktail, some sort of spirit, something sweet, and some citrus juice. So in this particular case, we're going to start with ice, chilling the glass and the cocktail shaker. We're going to start with 2 ounces of apple brandy. This is a type called Pommeau. And among other things, it's got a lovely golden color. And this is going to carry some authority, some "I'm not in the mood for your nonsense" kind of energy. But that's going to be mellowed out by perhaps the most dramatic bottle on any bartender's shelf. This is called Galliano. It's a vanilla-scented Italian liqueur, and vanilla and apple go very well together. And in this particular case, that's nice. In this particular case, it's going to mellow it out a little bit. It's going to say, "Oh, hey, you've got depths, you've got authority, and you've got gentle sweetness to you." Okay, for the citrus, we're going to go with fresh squeezed lemon juice. And I'm still pleased with this new juicer, but I would say if you decide to get one, go with stainless steel. The aluminum doesn't always, it leaves a little residue on your hands sometimes. Okay, that was 1 ounce of... That was 1 ounce each of the Galliano and of the lemon juice. Okay, at this point, we've got our base cocktail. As you can see, beautiful dark yellow color. And just by the way, if you see a couple of lemon seeds go into the juicer, they get strained out as we strain with that Boston strainer. Okay, now this is where the finesse comes in. We're going to go with 1/2 ounce of grenadine, and we're pouring it over one of the ice cubes. And because the grenadine is denser than the rest of the cocktail, it puddles up. It pools up. It collects invitingly at the bottom of the glass. And you get a little bit of tequila sunrise vibe there. And the last ingredient, and this is kind of playing with dynamite, this is rose water. I used the smallest measuring spoon I've got. If you've got an eyedropper, that'd be even better. We want 3 to 4 drops, not ounces, not cups, not gallons, 3 to 4 drops of rose water. It's powerful stuff, but it is worth it when you get the ratios right. As we say, the color is beautiful. Okay. So there's the apple brandy. There's the lemon juice right up front. Oh, but then there's the Galliano and just the merest hint of the scent of roses, like a beautiful woman who just disappeared into a crowd.